Hi. I've just read a case which is really symbolic, I think, of a wider problem in our justice system. Now, this is a subject I feel very strongly about. I've made no secret of that over the years. I've covered other cases on this channel. Just as a disclaimer, everything I'm saying here is already in the public domain. It's already been reported. So, I'm not in contempt of court or anything like that. Um, but I think it does deserve a look, and there's a lot of talking points around this, so bear with me. Just try to get in a more comfortable position here. I'm going to read out the article. It's not excessively long, so bear with me. I always do that because it's important to give context. And I think there's actually two issues at stake here. One is justice. The other is the issue of modern day slavery and exploitation. And I want to discuss both issues. So without further ado, this is the report. It's from Yahoo News, but it's via the Telegraph, or rather Microsoft News. Um, the links I give on Microsoft News, but the report's from the Daily Telegraph, and it doesn't name the reporters, it just says Telegraph reporters. This is the headline. I'll put a link as I always do. Man who exploited slave kept in squalid shed and horse box for 40 years. Bear in mind, 40 years, given 18-month suspended sentence. A man who exploited a slave was found living in a squalid, who was found living in a squalid shed has walked free from court. Friday, Peter Swales Jr., 56, was sentenced at Carlisle Crown Court to a 9-month jail term, suspended for 18 months. The victim had been used and abused for 40 years by the defendant's father, Peter Swales Jr., the court heard. He was made to live in a horse box, a disused caravan, and more recently in a shed on a residential site in Carlisle. The Crown accepted the defendant's guilty plea last month to conspiracy to arrange or facilitate the travel of another with a view to exploitation on the basis he was unaware of the victim's living conditions. Peter Swales, 80, who died last year, had denied the offence. Barbara Webster, prosecuting, said when the victim was around 18 years of age, he was approached by Mr. Swales Sr. and invited to work with him doing various jobs. He lived in the same site as Mr. Swales Sr. He had various accommodations, including a horse box, an old caravan, in the last 5 years or so, and during this offending, the shed that we have heard so much about. And there's a photo of it in the report. It's disgusting. Squalid, dank looking place. The court will be aware that he lived in the shed next to the chalet of Mr. Swales, with no heating, no lighting, and no flooring. In stark contrast, the family dog lived in much more comfortable surroundings. Miss Webster said the victim had a low IQ and very little understanding of the world around him. She went on, he was found by the police living in a rotten shed and water pouring through it with a makeshift bed and congealed vomit in the corner. It's difficult even reading this. Not the way that anyone would choose freely to live, not where he would be if he could have found himself in better living accommodation. He had few possessions to show for his 40 years of hard work. He only had a wash bag, three second-hand coats, a few stained duvets and CDs. He lived with the Swales family for many years after being in care as a child, with Swales Sr. telling him he was his boss. When he was not being made to work, Swales Sr. would order him to do chores such as painting the kitchen and cutting the grass. In the nearby similar sized shed to the victim's accommodation, there was a fitted carpet, a light, a gas heater, and the family dog. Miss Webster said Swales Sr. had a far better standard of living, an elaborate carpeted home, and expensive personal belongings. A palace, by contrast to where the victim lived. When officers attended the traveller site in October 2018, the victim told them he was only receiving £10 a day for his work duties. Under the plea deal, the prosecution accepted that Swales Jr. was under the coercive control of Swales Sr. Judge Richard Archer told Swales Jr., "You may not have known the true extent of the victim's living conditions or his precise IQ, but it must have been obvious to you that he did not have any real appreciation for the potential consequences of some of the work that you required him to perform at an undervalue and with little or no regard for his personal safety." Sentencing the father of five to a 9-month jail term, suspended for 18 months, he said he took into account a pre-sentence report which assessed Swales Jr. as posing a very low risk of reoffending and also his personal mitigation, including his poor health. What a useless judge. What utterly useless judge. I'm not going to mince my words. I have no respect for judges like that. Um, so let's look at the mitigating circumstances. Apparently, he took into account this pre-sentencing report. So Swales Jr. is in poor health, and supposedly he didn't know the extent. Um, 40 years. Swales Jr. is 56, so at least a good part of that. He would have been an adult. He would have been capable of asking questions. Even if he was bullied by his father and there was a degree of coercive control, I find it extremely hard to believe that he knew nothing. That just seems implausible. I mean, unless he was physically, it just seems utterly implausible. And as the judge himself acknowledged, this is the thing that I find really galling. Judges themselves often, you know, show that they are not as um, they contradict their own mitigation given because the judge himself is saying you must have known. So why then give such a soft, meaningless sentence? It makes my blood boil. Like I said, there's two issues here. One of them is justice. I'll come back to that. But the first issue, of course, is modern day slavery and exploitation. And I'm going to say the elephant in the room. More often than not, it's traveller communities that are involved in this. In other cases, it's been traveller communities. This doesn't mean that every traveller is involved in exploitation. Of course not. But it's clearly an issue in that community. Um, we've heard a lot about slavery in recent years. We've heard about the transatlantic slave trade. It's a historic event. There was the Colson Four. Now, those who are most energetic in campaigning against the transatlantic slavery of the 18th century, where are they when cases like this come up? Where's their outrage? I'm outraged. The government spoke a tough about modern day slavery, but where's the deterrent here? If this is the outcome, a suspended sentence, where's the deterrent? All that's going to do is send out a message to others out there right now in Britain in 2022 who are exploiting other human beings, which, to my line of thinking, has to be one of the most depraved, evil, despicable crimes there is. I put it up there with child exploitation and first degree murder. Um, I think it really is one of the most heinous crimes there is. And yes, the victim may technically have been paid, but effectively that was slavery, given into account his learning difficulties or his low IQ. Um, I hope he's getting the support he needs. Um, but that's just monstrous to treat a fellow human being like that for 40 years. 40 years. Put that in context. That's about 1982. So the Falklands War. That entire time this man's been living in these conditions. Um, I just feel total disgust. Firstly at the crime itself, but also at the travesty of justice. Now, I looked up Carlisle Crown Court, and surprise, surprise, there's absolutely no way to contact them. It's Carlisle Magistrates Court. There's no information online about a Carlisle Crown Court. Googled it because I want to express my frustration directly. And this comes to my second point. I've long argued that our justice system is far too soft. I also believe it's a bit more than that. I believe there is an arrogance and there is an elitism whereby, and I don't, I'm by elitism, I'm not talking about wealth. That's not what I'm referring to. I'm talking about this kind of arrogant disregard for public opinion, whereby time after time after time we see these pathetic outcomes. And what power does the public have? Almost none. I mean, I could write to the Attorney General and ask him to look at this case, and he might, push it. But more often than not, no outcome changes. It's very difficult in this country for a soft sentence to be reversed into a more robust sentence. Very occasionally it happened. It happened recently with that child that was killed by his mother and her partner. Sometimes it happens, but that just shows how bureaucratic the system is. Now, that's a problem because if the public have no faith in our justice system, and I'm fairly confident that if you'd done a vox pop on the street and asked average members of the public, what do you think about justice system? I would be quite confident in saying about 70% will say it's too soft. And that is not tabloid fueled sensationalism. That's not misplaced. A case like this absolutely solidly proves it is too soft. I don't know how anybody could rationally say that a suspended sentence in a case like this is justified. Like I say, even if the defendant, um, this thing about he poses a low risk, but that shouldn't be the only consideration. It should be the crime that has taken place. Even if he does pose a low risk to the public, even if he's in poor health, even if he was controlled by his father, all of those things, I don't think any of that is enough to justify a suspended sentence. I would have given him at least 5 years, at least. Even that would be too soft. Um, so I just feel total disgust. And how does a member of the public hold Judge Archer to account? There's basically no way. So something has to fundamentally change in our system. What I would like to see is judges far more accountable, weak judges being far more accountable. And legal hacks will say, "Oh, you're showing contempt of court, or you're showing, you're stoking up distrust of the system." Well, I do distrust the system. I think it's too weak. I think that the system is its own worst enemy because if you look at the sentencing council of England and Wales, they have this thing about misconceptions about the justice system. Judges don't live in the real world. Judges, blah blah blah, and they have all these excuses. But I don't think they really grasp the way the public feels about cases like this. So I do think they're tone deaf. I really do. Because the fact that they disregard how the public feels about cases like this, and it's not just me, I was looking at the comments, and every single one was vocalizing anger and disbelief at such a soft sentence. So it's not just me. It wasn't balanced. It wasn't like some people would say, oh, well, the defendant had these mitigating circumstances. No, every single comment was negative. It was expressing anger. Now, if that is a sort of indicator of how society feels, then it speaks volumes. And I think that the public feel utterly powerless. So I want to see a system where judges, frankly, have their jobs on the line. I'm not talking about personal threats against them. I'm talking about having their jobs on the line. They're in a position of power. I think whenever a judge issues a disproportionately weak sentence, they should have their job on the line, basically. Or at least, at the very least, they should come under a lot of pressure to justify the sentence. And I'm well aware of what would play out. If politicians spoke up on this, they would be accused of interfering in the independence of our justice system. That's another reason why I say I think it's arrogant, because they don't want to be held to account. These judges, this legal establishment, they just don't want to be held to account. They continue issuing these pathetic so-called sentences, and what can anyone do about it? It infuriates me. Like I say, there is anyone can write to the Attorney General and ask for a look at that. I'll do it just so that I'm not all hot air. I will do it, but I won't be confident. I don't think it will change the result much because more often than not, it doesn't. So what I would like to see is a system that's far more accountable. And I do think part of that is judges themselves. I don't really buy this argument, oh, they have their hands tied. Um, I just don't accept that. I think this judge could very well have given a stiffer sentence, send out a message that human trafficking and human exploitation will be punished. He could have done that. He chose not to. He chose to be weak. Um, it may vary from court to court. This isn't the first time I've heard of a weak sentence being passed at Carlisle Crown Court, so maybe it's that particular jurisdiction. Maybe there is variation from court Court. But I think overall, our system is just, I think there's a reason why people don't trust it. I'm not saying in every single case this happens. There are some cases where the outcome is justified. I recently read about some teenagers that killed a man in Manchester, and they did get a stiff sentence. So it's not universal. Sometimes the outcome is deserved, but more often than not, it's just too lenient. I mean, this was not a trivial crime. This was slavery. Can you get much worse? Other than terrorism and child kidnapping, I just think that I just feel utter disgust. I mean, Swales Jr. must have known something. He must have. I mean, it's suspicious that he didn't know the living conditions. Does that indicate that he was kept separate from them? And what about when Swales Sr. died? What about in that whole period? Did he know nothing? I just don't buy that he was a helpless bystander. Um, but yeah, I think holding judges more to account, they should have their sentencing publicly available. I mean, why not? There's a site called They Work For You, which does that with MPs. Why shouldn't it be the same for judges? Every sentence they make should be publicly available so the public can scrutinise them. Now, I'm not saying that judges should be elected, because there might be some flaws in that, but I do think that they are not anywhere near accountable enough to the public. Come to think about it, to anybody except other judges. I mean, a judge can be held, can be penalised for misconduct. So, for example, if they're messing around with a juror during a trial, that's misconduct. That's a different thing. There's absolutely no way to hold a judge to account for soft sentencing, except that process which I mentioned, which is very bureaucratic and highly unlikely to make any difference. And if people think I'm being too harsh here on judges, that, oh, they're only doing the job, what about the judge? I forget which jurisdiction it was, but he let a rapist away with a suspended sentence on the grounds that the young lady somewhat provoked it. Now, tell me that a judge like that shouldn't be facing public scrutiny. I feel anger, disillusion, and it just seems nothing ever changes. The Tories talk tough. Dominic Raab talks tough, but what changes? This shouldn't be happening. I want to see judges having their hands tied so that in a case like this, there's a minimum of, say, 5 years, so that they've no choice but to give the defendant 5 years. It's not about him being a risk to the public, it's about what he has already done. He was complicit in the brutal exploitation of another human being. Anyway, I'll round this up as I'll just end up repeating myself, but I just don't know. I've long been convinced that something needs to change, and I've mulled over different ways that this can happen. I keep mentioning judges being accountable. That's part of it. Definitely, legislators are responsible as well. They're the ones who issue the sentencing guidelines. I think the Sentencing Council of England and Wales need to get a reality check. They have, I believe, 12 commissioners or 10 commissioners, but I think they have one representing victims. Um, I've had some exchanges with them. I'm not overly enthusiastic about the responses. But basically, I just think we need a criminal justice system that the public can trust. And right now, the trust is very, very, very low. And there's a reason for that. So, judges, lawyers, the entire legal establishment, frankly, needs to consider this and consider how important it is. Um, because after all, if we can't trust one of our major institutions, we've got a serious problem with democracy. I do think it's a question of democracy. I mean, I want to do what I can, but I'm one person. There's limits on what I could do. I could start petitions. I could maybe set up some sort of organization, but I've got limited legal knowledge. Um, I don't know. I just feel something has to change. I want to see much stiffer sentences for serious crimes. I want to see much more accountability in the system as a whole. I just hope the victim in this case gets the help he needs. And shame on Carlisle Crown Court and our pathetic justice system.